Hello everybody, and welcome back to another Tech Tree Overview. And today we're going to cover the Royal Navy cruisers. Yay, the Brits have finally shown up. Wonder if their ships are any good. Well, if you've been wondering that question, then hopefully this video will be able to, well, shed some light on that question. So, well, let's see, I guess a couple of things first. First of all, I really wish we actually gotten a British-themed port. It would have been really nice to have, like, maybe London in the background. Although I guess New York is okay. I mean, allies after all. But I just kind of wish we got like a coinciding national dock as well. Okay, that's like a minor complaint. So this video, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look over each of the categories. So let's say survivability and armor first, then guns, then torpedoes and AA, etc. for all the ships. Like, so you'll see how I do this in a second. Okay. So let's start with the Black Swan, because this is the Tier 1 British cruiser, and this thing is sweet. Well, at least the guns are sweet. The armor, not so much, but then that's going to be like a Royal Navy thing. The armor is just... yikes. I don't know what happened to the armor. So, anyways, let's take a look at the Black Swan. Here's the armor layout. If you take a look at it, its forward end plating is 6mm. Its side plating is 10mm, and its aft here is 6mm, and only here, this little piece that covers the stern is 13mm thick. Take away all of the extra stuff that we don't really need. Let's take a look at the Citadel. Citadel sticks out of the water a little bit, protected by only 10mm of armor. So the Black Swan essentially has no armor at all. The bow here, 6mm, can be overmatched by 102mm guns. So the guns that the Black Swan carries can just overmatch that. Though, doesn't even have to worry about auto bounce, it just go right through. And yeah, you're just going to take damage, and lots of damage. Okay, so Black Swan, right? But then, don't worry, all the British cruisers are like this. Alright, let's move up to the Weymouth. And the Weymouth at Tier 2, surprisingly one of the better, quote unquote, protected British cruisers. The forward bow armor, 6mm, is still terrible. You're still just going to get penned for days there. Your stern is now also 6, also getting penned for days there. Your side plating here is 10mm, the outer plating, although if you take away everything, you do see that the Citadel it's sticking out of the water a little bit, but you have this piece that's sloped, which means that maybe Citadel hits aren't as easy to get on the Weymouth. But then again, when you consider the fact that you have like nothing for bow armor and a very thin piece here to protect it, I don't know, maybe shells going through there with Citadel. You're going to be taking Citadels. Alright. But at least slightly better protected, because the ships after this tend to get a little bit scary when it comes to Citadel protection. Here's the Caledon. Now, the Caledon has a lower piece of bow armor, that's 38mm, so a little bit better protected, but the upper piece is 6mm, which means, yes, still overmatched by everything. And that, by the way, is the glorious Citadel. Yeah, it's sticking that much out of the water. I think it's competing with the Kuma to see who's got the bigger Citadel, although I think Kuma's still a little bit bigger. That's a huge Citadel that sticks out of the water. It's protected by 76mm of armor, but then again, anything that hits that area is gonna make this ship go boom. Again, look at that, 6mm of forward. Yeah, that's just not fun. You're gonna get overmatched like crazy there on the bow armor. And just wait till we get to the guns, because the British cruisers are not friends when they run into each other either. They kind of have the ability to really wreck each other, but we'll get to that in a second. Things don't improve as you go up to Tier 4. Yeah, that huge Citadel thing continues. There's another huge Citadel that sticks out of the water, protected by not very thick amounts of armor, by the way. And if you think of something that would be comparable, think the Omaha and how easy that ship is to Citadel. So, moving on, the Emerald. Tier 5, and things get a little bit better. A little bit. The bow armor is finally increased a little bit more. You got 10mm, but then again, still overmatched by 152mm guns. So not fun there. And then of course, still that massive Citadel sticking out of the water. Yeah, this is like a trend, in case you haven't noticed. It's like all the British cruisers. And then you finally get up to tier 6, and things start to look a little bit better at tier 6, actually. Take a look at tier 6, and you'll notice that, ooh, you know, things start to get a little bit better. The Citadel is at least at the waterline now. It's not under the waterline, it's at the waterline, which means you're going to get Citadel, but just a little bit more difficult than something like the Emerald, where it's just towering out of the water. But you're still going to get Citadel with the Leander here. Moving on, and we meet the Fiji at tier 7. Similar positioning of the Citadel to the Leander. It's a little bit more closer to the waterline, but yeah, not very thickly protected. Oh yeah, did you also notice that while the Leander Citadel is actually relatively small, only about this big, take a look at the Fiji Citadel. Dear Lord, that thing goes from just under the forward turrets to all the way to the rear turret, and yeah, protected by 51 and 38 millimeters of armor plating here, 114 millimeters there. The top is, well, the top is okay, 38 millimeters, but not in the middle. It's only 9 millimeters there. And when you factor in the bow of only 13 millimeters, not fun at all. I mean, you are now, at least now you're protected against 152 millimeter guns, but run to heavy cruisers at tier 7 and 8 with 203s, and they will still overmatch this frontal armor. We're not even talking about battleships here, we're just talking heavy cruisers. Moving on, and things don't look all that good for the Edinboro either. Yes, you know, the Citadel again is at least closer to the waterline, but again, it's a massive Citadel, the same length as the Fiji Citadel. It's huge. Armor protection ain't that great, and of course you still have that very, very weak bow armor, so even going bow in here, not really going to be saving you all that much. I mean, better than the Fiji. I mean, you know, 13 millimeters here is vulnerable to 203s. At least the Edinboro is safe from 203s from bow in, but any battleship that looks at you the wrong way and you're in trouble. And then we get to Neptune and Minotaur, and same story. Huge Citadel areas, very weakly protected bows, and just these ships. These ships do not enjoy battleships. I mean, the best way to describe it is you see a battleship, you better run, and you better hide behind islands, because, yeah, these ships just They are going to start to magnetically attract all battleship shells, as every battleship captain worth their damn is going to be shooting at them. And they're just going to eat metric loads of Citadels everywhere. So that's the first thing you have to know about these Royal Navy cruisers. They are extremely fragile, which means islands are going to become your best friends. And for those of you who prefer the anime version, the islands are going to become your waifus. You're going to hug them. You're just going to hug them and love them and try to stay as hidden as possible, because your guns can at least do some pretty interesting things. The guns are one of the more interesting things about the Royal Navy cruisers. All of them, with the exception of the Black Swan. The Black Swan's the only one that packs 102mm guns. Everything else packs 152mm guns. So these are light cruiser guns, you say. Yes, that's true. Well, how are they different? Well, they don't fire HE. That's the first thing. So these ships fire only armor piercing. That's right. No HE, and this was because I think Wargaming wanted to avoid the whole Flint 2.0 thing. So they went ahead with all AP. So you're probably thinking, geez, all AP? Isn't there like all this armor angling thing? How did these ships compete in an environment like that? Well, a couple of things. One, they have phenomenal auto bounce region. So for every other nation in the game, the auto bounce region, with the exception of the USN heavy cruisers, by the way, every other nation has an auto bounce region that starts at 45 degrees angle to 60 degrees. And at 45 degrees, you know, the chance is pretty low to auto bounce. Once you get to 60, it's almost 100% chance that you'll auto bounce. The US heavy cruisers were special. They had an auto bounce region that started at 60 degrees and ended at 67.5. So you could still be shooting armor piercing at something that was pretty well angled, and you could still get some hits. Well, the Royal Navy cruisers take that to an even greater extreme. Their auto bounce region starts at 60 degrees and goes out to almost 75 degrees, which means that you can have something that's pretty darn angled, let's say 70 degrees, and you could still land citadels. For anybody who's actually been playing the Black Swan, you probably noticed that when you were shooting at the other tier 1 cruisers, that you were probably getting a whole bunch of Citadel hits, including against other Black Swans. You guys were pretty lethal against each other because, oh, by the way, yeah, remember the whole overmatch bow and then, you know, have no sight armor to protect you? Well, with these amazing auto bounce angles, yeah, you pretty much can have a target that's very decently angled and you'd still be able to Citadel them for days. So that's the first thing about Royal Navy cruisers that make them special. And the second thing is they have extremely short detonator fuses. So all the other nations right now, in the later tiers, the detonator times become like 0.033 seconds. There are exceptions with certain ships having very fast detonator fuses that go 0.01. Well, the British cruisers have detonator fuses that are at 0.005. So that means that with other nations and, you know, other ships where you might be overpenning stuff, well, with the British cruisers, the overpens don't really happen, and that means destroyers, if you happen to get close to one of these things, watch the hell out, because their armor piercing won't overpen you. They will do penetration damage, and that really hurts, because if you look at the damage, I'm not looking at tier 1, but if you look at, like, let's say mid-tier, tier 6, you're talking 3,100 max AP shell damage, and per shell, if you take penetration damage, that's 33% of that. That hurts. That's 1,000 damage, like, per shell. And so, yeah, very legit. If you're playing, let's say, not tier 9, but let's say you were a tier 10 destroyer and you ran into a tier 10 Minotaur, in one salvo, it could take off 10,000 of your HP. And then, of course, it can reload its guns in, 3.2 seconds, and it would just rip you a new one. So, a couple things to, so a couple of the good things about the Royal Navy guns is they have very good auto bounce regions, and they also have very short detonator fuses, which means not a lot of AP overpens that you're going to be getting. However, the guns do have their flaws. Now, I'm not saying these guns are perfect. They definitely have their issues as well. Most of the ships on the British line, if you take a look at the shell velocity, shell velocity tends to be pretty low. I mean, the Minotaur's at 768 meters per second. If you look at the Neptune, it's the same. If you look at the Edinboro, you're looking at 841, so a little bit better on the Edinboro. If you're on the Fiji, 841, so that's okay. Leander's 841. Emerald, I think, is the only one that's actually kind of on the fast side at 936. And then you go down to tier 4, which is the Dene, and it's 853 again. And you go down to Caledon, 853. You go to the Weymouth, and you're talking 773. What does this mean, you ask? Well, if you don't have as great muzzle velocity on your shells, the initial muzzle velocity on the shells, over long distances with a relatively light shell, well, you lose quite a bit of penetration, that's one. And second, well, the arcs tend to be more the arcing high type, which, mind you, is both a good thing and a bad thing, and I'll get to that in a second too. At range, it's a little bit hard to land shots, to be honest, especially when you're talking shell flight times into the 13, 14 second range. It's going to become a struggle. I mean, that's, of course, that was for the tier 10. So, I mean, imagine trying to hit a moving battleship at long range. It's difficult, although the nice reload does help. So that's one issue. Hitting targets at range is a little bit more challenging. However, again, having good arcs can be a good thing. It does allow you to hug more islands. So, I mean, maybe Wargaming's trying to shift from smoke meta to island hug meta. I don't know. That might be a thing. But you really do have to hug a lot of islands with these ships. Aside from those particular things about the guns, is there anything else that I actually forgot? And the answer, I think, is no. Oh, yeah, I did want to mention that at a lot of the earlier tiers, the British cruisers themselves are the worst friends when they meet each other, because they can overmatch each other's bows with their 152mm guns, and then because of the great auto bounce region, angling might not be all super effective. I mean, it's effective, but I mean, once you go bow in and you do that, a lot of shells will bounce, but if you just give it like that much angle, they will be able to start getting penetration. So yeah, they're not each other's best friends, although for these ships the battles don't even matter because overmatch. So yeah, I mean, British cruisers are very, very fragile, but their guns, like I said, are actually kind of interesting. And here's just a sort of a short gameplay clip. So I'm in an Edinboro. I've seen a chappie got into something that's relatively extreme in terms of the angling. Yeah, you know, the AP, you can still, even at this angle, you can still fire AP and still reliably get penetrations and even citadels depending on where you're hitting. And eventually what I'll do is I'll even push further in a little bit more, and I think even around 75-degree angle, I was still able to get some penetration, although you definitely started to see more bounces. So you're probably wondering how you can use this to your advantage. Well, again, if you see ships that are normally like this, where with a lot of other ships AP you just wouldn't shoot at, with the Royal Navy cruisers, go ahead, you're probably going to be able to get pens or even citadels depending on how extreme the angle is. Another thing that you can do to really sort of utilize this to your advantage is just aim for superstructure. I mean, the Royal Navy cruisers, the AP, yes, maybe not super effective against heavily angled belt armor, but you could go for the superstructure and get some pretty consistent damage. When I was testing against a Yamato and just hitting superstructure with a Minotaur, I think per salvo damage I was still seeing maybe 4,000, which is quite a lot of damage. Against destroyers, well, I'll just let the video sort of talk for itself. Yeah, the AP doesn't overpen. You just get tons of penetration damage, so destroyers, watch out. I do have to make one note that this does not apply to the Belfast. The Belfast actually has pretty normal detonator times. It's just the tech tree line British cruisers where they have this ridiculous armor piercing where here, I mean, there's an Udaloy, there's nearly 10k and now you're dead. That's what you can do with these British AP shells against destroyers when they don't overpen. British cruiser torpedoes are also unique, so they don't really have that widespread thing. When you have widespread selected, it does the normal full spread of torpedoes, except it's all narrow spread. And when you go to the narrow spread with the British cruisers, you fire individual torpedoes. And what this allows you to do is make your own patterns of torpedoes, which if you do it correctly will be very, very hard to dodge, and the potential amount of damage that you can hit with those torpedoes is utterly crazy. Now, if there was one weakness for British cruisers, it would most likely be the anti-aircraft. The AA, actually, I'll actually talk about the AA in a second here, because at the lower tiers, the A isn't that great. So the Danae, A is kind of meh. If you look at the Emerald, the A is kind of meh. If you take a look at the Leander, okay, it's a little bit better. You have a little bit more AA, but it's still nothing really to write home about. You know, the Fiji is the same thing. A is getting a little bit better. Nothing amazing. And this problem, at least in the sort of the lower to mid tiers, is further complicated by the fact that the British cruisers don't get defensive fire as one of their consumable selections. So whatever you have in terms of the numbers here is pretty much what you've got. However, things start to change a little bit as you get to the later tiers. Even at tier 8, the A is still only alright. I mean, yes, you've got some 40mm, you got these 102mm dual purpose guns, like, okay, you're starting to get something. Where the A really starts to pick up is when you start to get to things like the Neptune, and specifically when you get to things like the Minotaur. Now, the reason why is because on the Neptune, well, you know, you've got quite a bit of long-range AA. So even without defensive fire, as long as you have manual AA skill on your captains, and you've equipped some of the AA modules, you're going to get some pretty solid AA capabilities. Of course, when you get to something like the Minotaur, which is actually kind of amusing because when I looked at it, I was like, oh, so British cruisers don't really have all that great AA. Look at AA stats. Oh, look, this thing has better AA stats than things like the North Carolina. So, and you know, and the guns have better range too, which is just, yeah, that just tells you, even though it doesn't have great AA, it will still knock planes out of the sky. And again, if you combine that with manual AA, especially for these late tier British cruisers, the AA is still quite formidable. So yeah, if you're in a carrier and you see these things, might not want to approach. Although, if you're a carrier and you see these lower tier ones, knock yourself out and go for it, because their A isn't all that great. British cruisers also do have one other very interesting thing about their maneuverability. Now, they're not the fastest ships. If you look at all the British cruisers, they're not super fast. The Weymouth is 26 knots, the Caledon is 29, the Danae is 30, Emerald's 33 knots, the Leander is 32.5. Like, top speed doesn't look all that great. But let me show you what these cruisers are capable of when they're actually maneuvering. And this is something that the British cruisers tend to be a little bit on the unique side with. Take a look at me. Here I am making basically full rudder turns. Watch my speed. There's a little bit of initial speed decrease, and then I actually start gaining speed back. British Royal Navy cruisers don't follow the laws of physics. That, or their engines just happen to be rocket powered. Finally, we talk about concealment, and British cruiser concealment is actually pretty darn good in most cases. If you take a look at, the lower tier cruisers, the concealment really, it's pretty good, but there's not much you can do with it, shall we say. Yes, if you get concealment expert skill at the low tiers, yes, you are able to get your ship to be pretty stealthy, but you can't stealth fire or anything like that. The beginning of stealth fire really sort of starts to happen around the Edinboro. The Edinboro has 11.7 kilometer stock detectability. If you throw on the concealment expert skill, you throw on the concealment module and the camo paint, you're able to get a bit of a stealth fire gap. However, as you keep going, let's say eventually you get up to something like the Neptune or the Minotaur, and you're able to actually equip the range increase module. So right now, let's say with the Neptune 16.5, if I go to the module section and throw in this gun fire control module, there you go, 19.2 kilometer range. Now that, combined with, a 13.1 kilometer stock surface detect, which right now, there's already a small Invisifire buffer zone. If I, equip the concealment module, get concealment expert skill, and the camo paint, I can get my detectability down a lot more, and I can have a much bigger Invisifire window. I think with the Minotaur, when I did the calculations, if I remember this correctly, it's something like with the range module and everything else, I believe if I remember it correctly, I had something like a 5 point something, almost, I think I had almost a 5 kilometer stealth fire gap. So that high concealment begins to indicate what the British Royal Navy cruisers is supposed to play like. You are expected to really sort of play that hide and go seek kind of game, that little peekaboo kind of thing where you just like pop up, pew pew, and then you disappear again. With the later tier ones, you really have to utilize that Invisifire capability. These ships are incredibly fragile, like I mentioned before. It's incredibly fragile, and so they're very dependent on cover, whether that's island cover, smoke cover. Right, the whole smoke thing is not going away. It's like, yes, this is not necessarily Flint 2.0, but it's Flint 2.0 AP edition. It's kind of like that. So yeah, they're very dependent on cover. They really do need that concealment in order to stay alive. And so to really take advantage of these ships, you have to be very almost cautious about your positioning and where you are. And you should never ever be anywhere near the front lines unless you just like to die really quick deaths and have Her Majesty pay up more gold to get you another ship. But okay, no, ignore that Monarch comment, by the way. All right, so that's all the stats of all the ships that I wanted to talk about. There is other things about the Royal Navy cruisers that are special, and it has a lot to do with their consumables, and not the upgrade modules, the actual consumables. Tier 1 and 2, nothing special, just a repair kit. Tier 3, you have a heal. You actually get a heal. Now, it's not an amazing heal, like it'll heal some HP, mostly like fire damage and HE damage and stuff like that, but it's a heal nonetheless, and you get it starting at Tier 3. Now, Tier 3, for the heals are just sort of okay, although starting at Tier 5, you actually get smoke. At tier 4 you don't, you only have hydro, but tier 5 you also have smoke, and I'll talk about smoke in a second. But the heals at the lower tiers, yeah, they last a while, 28 seconds. They heal a bit, and they're not bad. But where the heals really start to go crazy is once you start to hit, and you'll notice that the HP per second restoration up until like tier 7 is like 100 and something. And then you get to tier 8, and then you look at the heal, and it's like, all of a sudden, bam, this thing heals 729 HP per second. So you are able to pop off a heal, and never mind tier 9 and 10, they get like close to 900 HP a second. It's kind of crazy. They really do heal a lot. So yeah, you might want to actually consider, on Royal Navy cruisers, potentially the survivability expert skill could be useful. Also, don't forget to equip that flag. This particular flag, I can never remember the name for it, but it is the India Delta flag. You might be able to get a bit more HP recovery out of these flags as well. So, you know, at the later tiers, they're very, very interesting. They have this heal kit, but I guess it's kind of necessary considering how fragile they are. You are going to be taking damage sort of from everywhere. But British cruisers overall, I have to say, have a lot of toys to play with. Like, yes, I mean, you know, at the low tiers, they already get a heal to play with. You know, tier 4, they get a sonar. Tier 5, they get smoke, right? So smoke is the interesting one. British smoke is, it's a smoke. It actually lasts a good amount of time after you've laid it. 96 seconds for the tier 5 one, and if you get up to tier 10, the smoke will last a total of 113 seconds. So, you know, the smoke does actually stay on the battlefield for quite a while. The one issue, of course, is the fact that they are only active when you actually hit the consumable. They're active for 7 marvelous seconds, which means you will lay like 1 puff, okay, maybe 2 puffs, actually 2 puffs of smoke. Sometimes you only get 1 though. And that's it. Like, you get 1 puff of smoke. And if you are actually moving at speed, you would just outrun your smoke. So you have to slow down dramatically quite a lot, pop the smoke, and then stop inside of it for you to be able to utilize your own smoke. Of course, I did mention that these ships are incredibly fragile, right? So, like, the smoke cannot be a reactive kind of smoke. You cannot be like, oh, I'm in trouble, I'll pop smoke. Doesn't work. These smokes have to be planned. You have to be like, okay, I'm going to come here, and I'm going to use the smoke, and I'm going to use it here to do this with. It's got to be much, much more planned. You know, trying to, you know, let's say, get out of jail free card kind of thing, that doesn't really apply to these Royal Navy cruisers with smoke. Later tier British cruisers, if you trade in the smoke, you can also get radar. And the radar is, I think, even a little bit better than the USN radar, actually, to be honest. The Edinboro has a 9-kilometer radar that lasts for 30 seconds, and the Neptune has Neptune's radar here, 9.45 kilometers, lasts for 35 seconds. Minotaur's radar is, whoop, see that is there, 9.9 kilometers, lasts 40 seconds. I mean, these, you know, British radars at the later tier here, they're better than American radar even. And so, yeah, very, very useful thing, although you do have to give up smoke. So that does become sort of a balancing thing. Do you really want it, or do you prefer to have that extra charge of smoke? So that's really up to you. Although I would think if you're using islands properly, and especially when you're getting to things like the Minotaur, the Neptune, using stealth fire correctly, then maybe trading smoke for radar might be worth it. Because like I said, you are able to really wreck destroyers. By the way, to sort of put into perspective how short the smoke is, something like the, ooh, let's see, do I even have that ship? Maybe I do, maybe. I'm hoping I have the ship, otherwise I can't really show you guys this. Press accounts. They do give you a lot of ships, but sometimes you really have to look hard for it. Actually, yes, I do have it here. The Kutuzov, which is a cruiser with smoke. You take a look at it. It's active for 20 seconds. So the Kutuzov can actually lay itself a nice long line of smoke and then sort of scurry around within its smoke to do stuff. So, you know, yes, the smoke screen isn't active once it's been laid for very, very long. It's only 89 seconds. You at least are able to get a much bigger smoke cloud. If you look at other things like, ooh, I don't know, US destroyers, which are sort of much, much more famous for their smoke. I mean, the US destroyers have amazing smoke, mind you. So let's take a look at something like the Fletcher, for example. And you'll see that you have smoke that is active for 29 seconds. So that's a huge line of smoke, and it lasts forever at 127 seconds. So British cruiser smoke, it does last long, but it doesn't deploy very large smoke. It's really only for you and you only. And then, of course, remember, super vulnerable ships. Oh, and they also tend to be quite large, if you haven't noticed. I mean, these ships aren't particularly small. So even if you try to hide in smoke, if somebody's able to shoot into smoke and they hit you, they're still going to do damage. And I'm thinking with a ship this size, it's not going to be all that hard. So yeah, I mean, you know, that's sort of the things about these British cruisers. They have a lot of flexibility when it comes to their consumables. There's a lot of toys there for you to play with. The guns are interesting. The torpedoes are very interesting. Mind you, I really like the torpedoes, by the way. The A is kind of meh until the later tiers. Maneuverability is quite nice. Concealment's very nice, but extremely fragile ship. So in terms of playstyle, it's a lot of hiding, a lot of hugging islands, shooting from behind them, things like that. Now, unfortunately, on the press account, I didn't have a 19-point captain, so, you know, I'm not able to test it with a fully spec'd out captain, although, you know, from experience, my preferences will probably be along the following lines. On the first row, I would say you'd be okay getting things like basic firing training, just to increase the AA power just a little bit. On the second row, you can opt for, well, I mean, the second row you have a choice. You can either opt for, I would say, get incoming fire alert instead of expert marksman. But expert marksman, because again, I was testing this earlier. So, but you know, either of these two skills are okay, either super fast turret traverse or just having alert if somebody's shooting at you, which might be very useful. On the third row, I would say get superintendent, more buffs for your toys, more charges for them. So that's very, very nice. In the fourth row, you have a choice, right? You can either go with manual AA control, which gives you more pew pew, or you can get survivability expert. Now, a little bit of extra HP might not seem like a lot, but when you have the super heal that these ships get, maybe the extra survivability expert might help there. Who knows? You could also opt for advanced firing training if you really want more AA power. So AA power could be thing that works. I mean, you have a lot of long-range AA guns. I mean, you could get quite a large AA bubble up. So, you know, all three of these skills are viable for these Royal Navy ships. Now, on the last row, and I think this is a no-brainer, I would definitely say get Concealment Expert. These ships are just way too fragile for you to just be easily seen. So as much concealment as you humanly can, and try to stay hidden as much as possible. And that's pretty much my recommendations in terms of captain skills. In terms of modules, by the way, I mean, there's a lot of choice there. For a lot of the lower tier ships, you might just want to offer things like main battery 1, maybe a little bit of accuracy, maybe an AA module if you really want to get a little bit more AA. Although when you get up to tier 9 and 10, you do have a choice between either the range module, which I actually recommend because I would like to be able to stay safe, but you could also offer things like main battery mod 3 and just increase your pew pew more because, you know, hey, 3.2 seconds with that module, I think it drops down to like 2 point something. Gearing called, it wants its rate of fire back. So, you know, the Royal Navy cruisers, there is definitely some choice there. Although in terms of the utility modules, the last three, again, pretty self-explanatory. Probably Damacon 1, get steering gears, and then get concealment. You need stealth. Did I say that enough? You definitely need stealth on these ships. And so, yeah, that pretty much does it for this tech tree overview of British cruisers. If you have any additional questions about them, please do leave a question in the comment section below. I'll try my best to answer them, but, you know, life gets in the way of things, and sometimes I'm not able to. Also, do keep in mind that a giveaway video for the 50k sub thing should be coming tomorrow. Later today. It'll be coming in the next little while. I finally got confirmation from EU and NA that they're going to be able to award the prizes, and I'll let you all know the details in that particular video. Anyways, folks, take care, have a good one, and I'm looking forward to talking to all of you again soon.